Dr. Bret Contreras, aka the Glute Guy, and I talked about, you guessed it, how to train the glutes. We start with simple tricks and then get into Bret's rule of thirds used to maximize glute hypertrophy and build strength. Have you ever wondered if a bigger muscle means a stronger muscle? Bret goes into the research here as well. Hope you enjoy this one.
The Prehab audio experience will teach you how to take control of your health through knowledge by optimizing performance, promoting longevity, and keeping your movement system in tune. Welcome to your host, the Prehab Guys.
All right, guys, so today we have guest Bret Contreras, the Glute Guy. If you haven't already followed him before, I'm sure you've seen his stuff all over social media and his website. Glad to have you today, Bret, but I want to start out with having you introduce yourself. And I think the big question I have is, how did you become the Glute Guy? Where did that even come from?
So first off, thanks for having me on the podcast. I appreciate it. Now, the Glute Guy was actually a name given to me by my colleague, Martin Rooney. I met him at a seminar it was 10 years ago. And we talked about glutes for like 45 straight minutes. And he's like, you should call yourself the Glute Guy. And I thought, yeah, that's a good idea. But to introduce myself, I'm 42 years old. I've been lifting weights since I was 15. So 27 years of lifting experience. Been a personal trainer since I was 20. So 22 years of personal training. I think I got my CSCS 17 years ago. And then eventually got my Ph.D. in sports science. I've published 50 studies. I've been an author on 50 peer-reviewed published studies. I own the Glute Lab. It's a gym here in San Diego. We specialize in glute training. And then I'm probably most known for inventing the barbell hip thrust.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe, but I was the first person to ever. It's funny, if I put this on social media, everyone thinks it's been around forever, and it hasn't. And so it's so hilarious to me how if I put it on my, if I claim that I invented the barbell hip thrust, there's a bunch of youngsters that'll come on and be like, oh, did you invent squats and running and whatever? And I'll say, no, but I did invent the barbell hip thrust. And then a bunch of people will come on and be like, hip thrusts have been done forever. But I've been lifting forever. I never saw anyone even do bodyweight hip thrusts in the gym. It wasn't an exercise that you'd ever see in a gym. Now, it was popular in physical therapy circles, but no one ever used it to build their glutes. But nevertheless, no one ever put a barbell in their lap and did heavy hip thrusts. And those exercises were never popular. If you go back before 2009, that's when I first wrote my first article. 2006 is when I thought of it. And, we started doing it in my gym. But yeah, anytime I hear someone say that, I'm like, oh my God, that's so awesome. Will you send me a picture or video? Because I want to credit you. I'm going to credit you to my, I've got a million, between Instagram, I think I have 715,000 on Instagram, and I've got, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, my newsletter. I want to tell the world that you're the inventor. And they'll say, well, I don't have any pictures. Everyone was doing it back then, and I'll say, oh my God, that's great. Will you find me any picture or video of anyone doing it before 2009? Because I'd love to, or before 2006 is when I really first started doing them, because I'd love to credit them and teach people who the rightful inventor is. And they're like, well, I can't, there aren't any pictures, but everyone was doing them. I'm like, so hold on. So everyone was doing squats. I can find black and white pictures of squats. Black and white from the 1920s, you can find people doing squats and, Olympic lifts and even bench press when it first became popular in the 50s and stuff like that. You find pictures of it, but according to these people, hip thrusts, everyone was doing them, but it was just underground and no one ever took a video or a picture or ever wrote an article about it. Because that's another thing. The reason I'm so confident is because, first of all, when I wrote about it, in 2009, I searched for an entire week. Imagine spending an entire week of your life searching on Google And that's why I got a lot of like cool background information data. But I thought of every name, like the first word could be pelvic, supine, glute, floor. The second term could be bridge, raise, lift. Another word for the first term would be hip. Push up, like the last term, push up, whatever. I thought of
Yeah.
every combination of terms you could possibly call it. And I would search like 30 pages deep, and I'd go in forums I looked through books. I did find a cool picture. This is on the hip thrust wiki page. Yuri Verkhoshansky in 1978 showed some hip thrust variations, but it was like manual resistance. It was like a partner pushing against you, or you're putting a kettlebell on the foot of the opposite leg, doing single leg, which was cool. But I never found any barbell hip
Yeah.
thrust.
No, that's very interesting, and I think that you brought up a good point with PTs do like things like bridges, supine bridges, double leg, single leg, but you can't create the load that you can with a barbell hip thrust. You can't create that strength adaptation similarly to a barbell hip thrust. And I think I heard you talking about this on another podcast as well, but there are no images of this historically before that 2006 date, and there are tons of exercises in all these encyclopedia bodybuilding books or all these books that show all these exercises. There are no hip thrusts there, and I think that's a good point to validate you inventing it. And even if someone has done it before, maybe it wasn't intentionally or to the point where they wanted to popularize it, and therefore they didn't get credit for it.
And that's what I'm sure, like around the world, at some point, someone was just sitting there, like with a barbell in their lap, and they just went like, "Look, here's an exercise."
Yeah.
And started humping, started doing the humping motion. But
Air hump.
yeah, you're right. If you don't write about it, if you keep it secret, you don't get credit. If you have to popularize it and go out, and that's what I've made my. When I thought of it, this was 2006. I was watching a UFC fight, and I'm like, God, like buck him off of you. And I thought there should be an exercise to strengthen people's, bridging power.
Yeah. I mean,
what are the two drawbacks? You need more load and you need more range of motion, because on the floor, the barbell glute bridge is a very limited range of motion. So I thought, you could elevate your shoulders or your feet or both, or both. And, and then it took a while to actually, took me 2 years to think of doing it off a regular bench. At first, I did them off a glute ham, the rounded back pad of a glute ham developer, and put my feet up on a reverse hyper. So I was way up high in the air, and I would drop my hips real low. And then we figured out, it was just me and my trainers. This was 2006. I opened up a gym in Scottsdale. We gave it to all of our clients, and they loved it. But it's been an interesting progression, not only with the variations, but also with form. Before we didn't think about spinal and pelvic posture much as just thrust up, thrust your hips in the air. We didn't provide a lot of cueing and things like that. And every once in a while, someone would get back pain, so I started thinking about that. But it's gone through a big evolution. But yeah, I used to. It's funny, when I first started talking about it, I'd have all these guys in the field that were like, "Well, that's an activation exercise. You don't load up an activation exercise." And I'm like, okay. Like, I've measured the activation of it. So if you want to talk about activation, I can tell you a glute bridge might activate 20% of MBIC for the glutes. If you just do a bodyweight glute bridge, and then if you use, if I use 500 pounds, now it gets to over 100% of MBIC. MBIC meaning how hard you can squeeze your glutes on your own with just like manual resistance. And so it was just that it's new. And I think the reason it took off in popularity is because all the exercises that were popular for glutes at the time, things like squats and lunges and RDLs, you'd feel your glutes in the stretch position. You didn't ever get a pump in the glutes, and you didn't get a burn in your glutes. You'd be sore the next day, but you never felt like your glutes were the limiting factor. With squats and lunges, you wouldn't be like, my glutes gave out. It would be more like my quads gave out, or I felt it in my low back or something like that. Deadlifts, you felt, your low back or hamstrings or something. It wouldn't be like, my glutes failed me on this lift. Some people feel those lifts in their glutes, but a lot of people don't. They just feel sore the next day. Whereas with these exercises, you'd get a crazy burn and a glute pump, and you felt like your glutes were the limiting factor. So, but really, you should do both types of lifts.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but I guess going off of the form, how do you cue it now that you have a little more experience with it? Obviously, initially you just have someone thrust up, but what is that spinal cue that you give?
Okay, well, so here's, if you just do these simple steps, it's so easy to teach. So you you have someone, so it's easier at my gym because I have all the benches of different heights and I can fit the individual to the right size bench. But like, if you train a 5 foot person versus a 6'6" person, there's a big difference. We even have clients that are 4'11". We've got a few of them, and so I think one that's 4'10". So yeah, 4'10" versus like 6'8". You can't use the same exact bench for both of them. So anyway, for most people, around a 14-inch bench or 35.5 centimeter height it ends up being good. But say they use a taller bench in the gym, it'll be a little bit too tall. So what you have to do is you get in place, you thrust the bar off the ground a little bit, and then you crawl upwards to get your scapula in proper position. You want the bottom of the scaps to be touching the bench. A lot of people line up with their backs, with the bench too high up on their back, and they need to climb up. You kind of like walk your scapulae up. So then once you walk your scapulae up, you're shifted up higher onto the bench. Now you got to reposition your feet because you want the shins to be vertical at the lockout. So you just walk your feet back just a little bit. Okay. Then you go down to the bottom position. You sink down. And then from there, I'd say stop right there. And then I grab the back of the person's head. I hold it. And then I point to their sternum, the tip, like the xiphoid process area. I'll put my finger on that and I'll say, I want you to move mostly from here down. I want this part to stay relatively stationary. I want you to move mostly from here down. So then you'll see what they end up doing is, and then I'll keep the head positioned forward. So if they keep looking forward, what happens is you do not hyperextend. You end up thrusting your hips up, and you end up in a little bit of spinal flexion, which our industry has been kind of trained to think is bad, but I'll address that in a second. But anyway, you end up keeping the ribs down and posterior pelvic tilting, and then you squeeze the glutes. It looks like you don't quite lock out, but you do. You feel it in the glutes. You can't push the glutes up any higher. And so once you can't go any higher with the glutes, that's the terminal position. You go back down. Now, as to whether it's because some guys would say, oh, well, spinal flexion is bad. Here's the thing. Spinal flexion can be dangerous, especially when you have high compressive loads. Think of deadlifts. You never want people to do too much rounding on their deadlifts. If you train anyone, you know that leads to more injuries than staying in neutral when you're doing heavy deadlifts. All right, but with hip thrusts, when you do it that way, it shuts down the spinal erectors because they're not arching. They're actually, lengthening as you come up. So they're not contracting. You're not activating the erectors. So those are what produce a lot of the compressive forces. So without the compressive forces on the spine, I mean, think about it. We bend over several thousand times a day. You round your back several thousand times a day. It's not problematic unless there's a lot of spinal loading with it. And so this removes the spinal loading, and it's very safe to do. And I can explain the biomechanics and talk about the science of it, but we have 250 clients coming in and out of Glute Lab every month. And no one has ever hurt themselves. And we've been open for March, April, May, June, July, 17 months. So in 17 months, we haven't had a single injury, and everyone does, like several different hip thrust variations in their programs.
And you guys are loading them up too, right?
Oh yeah, they're strong. They're using, we have a lot of clients using 3-4 plates a side on their different variations, and they're fine.
Yeah. Why do you think that it is so difficult to have people activate their glutes? I mean, you see, like, if there's an average person on the street, you tell them to activate their quads, it's usually easier for them. Calves, no problem. But you tell someone to get that corticomotor excitability or that mind-muscle connection to their glutes, it's just a little more difficult for whatever reason. I know Dr. Chris Powers, he was our professor at PT school when we were at USC. He always talked about how the real estate in the brain designed to activate the glutes is inherently a little bit smaller, which can potentially be why it's so difficult. But why do you think that is? I mean, obviously people aren't training it, so that's one thing. But the average person, why would you say it's difficult?
It's funny. I got to meet Chris one day. I've been reading his research forever, and he's he's a much better scientist than I am, and so, I'd love to talk shop with him and meet him. But that's interesting because I've never studied the region of the the motor cortex, for example, that
Mm-hmm.
is responsible for glute activation, and I've never compared it to, like, let's look at this, this region versus the region that activates the quads, and is this indeed bigger? Here's how I've always explained it. And you learn this when you have electrodes hooked up to you. See, I've conducted a lot of EMG research, but I own an EMG instrument. So when you're doing when I'm doing experiments, I'll have the electrodes on, and I can walk around with a computer doing everyday tasks, and you can watch the muscle activity. So if you walk up, if you walk up steps, or if you stand up from a chair, you'll see quad activity go up to like 50, 60, sometimes 70% with things in just everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
So just everyday living, your quads are being activated every day. If you stand up from a chair, if you walk up steps, if you bend down and like lunge down to get something, you're regularly activating your quads to 50 to 70% of MVIC every day, just carrying out activities of daily living. In contrast, the glutes don't get that high of activation doing things like walking upstairs and standing up from a chair. They really get called upon more when loads get heavier and heavier, or when you're doing things that are much more explosive, explosive velocities and things like that. So I just think it's a simple case of use disuse. And a lot of women will be like, I had nice glutes in high school because they were playing sports, and they were maybe had a weights class or playing lifting weights for sport, and then they stop, and their glutes eventually atrophy away over time. Whereas if you kept playing those, they would activate just fine. So I think it's just a use-disuse thing, but it's interesting. I'll look into that thing from here.
Yeah. No, what you say makes perfect sense. And maybe that's just exacerbating this issue that we inherently have a difficult time recruiting these glute muscles. And we're strengthening this dysfunction potentially.
But what's nice, though, is what you didn't hear Chris or myself say. This typical, you ask 100 glute experts, and 99 of them will tell you, they'll give you the generic, okay, you're sitting, and that that creates tightness, and so you have this this stiff hip flexors, and then because of your stiff hip flexors, you're going to get this active adaptive shortening of your hip flexors. You're going to have reciprocal inhibition of the gluteals, and now because of your inhibited glutes, you have synergistic dominance of the hamstrings and adductors, and you're over relying on them, and then you get gluteomnesia, and all these terms, they sound really, I mean, you tell that to the average client, you start throwing out terms like adaptive shortening, reciprocal inhibition, gluteomnesia, synergistic dominance. These have terms. These are terms. They're scientific terms. They have to be right. I don't buy it, though. I don't think, a lot of things get inhibited and with pain, or with and so the thing is, when you sit 6 hours a day, well, you're also standing and walking maybe 6 hours a day, and then you're sleeping for say 8 hours a night. In this case, that would undo the effects of the sitting. So I agree. Like when when you sit like all day, you just feel junky, and like say you try to squat after sitting for like 10 straight hours, it wouldn't feel good. But if you should be getting up every hour, walking around, stretching a little bit, or better yet, every 20 minutes or so. And then if you do little things, you can prevent a lot of that from happening. And I'll tell you a little case study on myself. I was so worried when I when I closed up my first gym, I wanted to blog and write more. So I wanted to dedicate myself to having a blog. So I knew I couldn't do that if I'm training people all day. So I stopped training when you know, as a personal trainer, you're on your feet all day long. And I decided, okay, I'm gonna be sitting like most of the day blogging. I'm really worried because this is gonna happen to me. I'm gonna get glute amnesia, and my glutes are gonna shrink and atrophy a little bit, and I'm gonna lose some of the function out of them. And because I wasn't on my actually glutes grew because I wasn't so tired from being on my feet all day being a personal trainer. And being a personal trainer is not only draining physically because you're on your feet all day, it's also draining mentally because you're taxed. Your brain is taxed, and you're tired, and when you care about your clients, you'll feel like when they're doing a set, you'll feel yourself like your muscles clench up, like trying to like do the lift for them. You're like, come on, two more, and you're motivating them, and that drains you a little bit. So, I think for those reasons, my glutes grew. So it's like, okay, this theory is silly as long as you're lifting weights hard. And a final piece of evidence, there's actually a study funded by NASA, and they had like subjects do 56 complete days of bed rest. Like complete bed rest. They never got out of bed for 56 days.
Damn.
Except, one group never got out of bed. The other group got out of bed just to do like a quick lifting session, but they wanted to simulate space. So they had this lying squat machine, the horizontal, the lying, it's like a leg press,
yeah.
the lying squat machine. They did one set of that 3 times a week in the 8 to 12 rep range, but with progressive overload. So anyway, I calculated the time. It was like, basically it was when you worked it out by the tempo and the reps, their glutes were activated 1 minute for 1 minute because they just did one set, right? So 1 minute, 3 times a week. So 3 minutes. So it'd be about 12 minutes a week, which comes to like, 12 minutes 12 minutes a month comes to like 0.0 something percent of your time. So 99% of the time their glutes were shut off, and only way less than 1% of their time were they activated, and their glutes grew. Their glutes actually grew under these conditions because they were utilizing progressive overload, and they were laying around all day long. So it throws a wrench in that theory.
Yeah, no, I think that's cool. I mean, that idea behind lower cross syndrome, which is like that anterior pelvic tilt which Vladimir Yonda popularized way back, I think has been disproven in the literature. And like you said, as long as you stay active, stay engaged, progressively load the tissue, there shouldn't be any issues there. Like sitting in itself, this is what I always tell my patients, sitting in itself is inherently not bad. It's the lack of variety of movement that you put your body through, which is the detrimental part. So you can sit for 10 hours, but if you get up and move every 20 minutes, that's no longer an issue. It's the sitting for 2 hours at one time, which can potentially create that issue. But anyways, let's say someone has difficulty with activating their glutes, which a majority of untrained individuals do. Where would you start someone? Like how would that look like? Do you do like isometric holds? Do you start them with the hip thrust? Where would be like a good starting spot generally?
Okay, so that's a good question, and it all depends. So like I just peer reviewed a study. It actually just got published today. I'm going to make an infographic on it and put it on my Instagram. Seated glute squeezes for 15 minutes a day, increased hip extension strength. I think it was like 16% in 8 weeks. So even just squeezing your glutes helps. Yeah, I'm checking. Yeah, like 17% in the right glute, and 15 or 14% in the left glute. So
that's amazing.
So like, just the act of squeezing the glutes when you're a beginner builds hip extension strength. I didn't check if these were beginners, or I think they were beginners, but anyway, just activating your glutes when you're standing around, when you're, for a woman doing like dishes or laundry or something, if you can. God, that sounded bad. Men do. I don't do much of that, so I'm like, trying to think of when men would do it, but we do dishes too. I always laugh at how when I do dishes, I can deadlift 600 pounds, and when I do dishes, my low back gets burning so bad I have to take breaks after like 3 minutes.
You don't practice it, yeah.
For men, whatever, standing around, whenever you think of like, just squeeze your glutes for 5 seconds on, 5 seconds off, do it for like, a minute, and do that like maybe 5 times a day if you can remember. And that will help. That will help build your glutes, or build your glute strength. I think it can even with advanced people, but with beginners especially. But then learn the glute bridge and hip thrust, just the body weight movement pattern. Learn how to do it as I described earlier. Learn the posterior pelvic tilt. Learn what in-range hip extension, what a lockout feels like, and then slowly, gradually add load. Most beginner females can use around 65 pounds starting off. Sometimes we have to just keep them at body weight, especially if they have low back pain or some other situation. But maybe it's 65 pounds for 3 sets of 12, and that's their starting point. And then we just slowly start to build. But you don't just do hip extension. The glutes are responsible for hip extension and posterior pelvic tilt, and then also hip abduction, hip external rotation. And there's a lot of different angles within those, like hip abduction especially can be carried out in the frontal plane or the transverse plane, meaning standing straight up or side lying versus bent over or like seated and leaning forward, So you want to do a variety of glute exercises. And the goal is after, like 6 months of training your glutes, you should be able to feel them activating really well during most things. Like I can feel them, no matter what, I can feel them activating a ton. However, if there are some people who really struggle to feel their glutes activating a lot.
Yeah.
For people, I'll tell them, like, don't worry about it. I never felt my glutes activating much. I just got way stronger with squats and deadlifts and things like that, and lunges, and my glutes got bigger. Your glutes will grow even if you don't feel them a lot, if you get stronger. But ideally, you'd do both. You'd both get stronger and you'd work on your mind-muscle connection, doing things like, like isometric glute squeezes and just using lighter loads, focusing really hard on feeling the glutes doing the job.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. I see people more in the rehab setting, and the first few sessions, I just load up the glutes isometrically, have them hold clams, fire hydrants, sideline hip abduction, hold 30 seconds to a minute, or as long as you really can up until failure, getting that corticomotor excitability, get them to get that mind-muscle connection. And then at the same time, I'll start introducing these different hinging movements, pelvic control, but obviously, if they can start loading earlier, even better. If you can start getting them doing some hip thrusts early on, even while they're building that connection, why not? Yeah, I like that. Let's say someone's able to start loading. What would, obviously when it's more of a, I guess intensity and frequency you can say are inversely related, where if you're doing exercises with low intensity, like isometrics, you can go more frequent. But let's say you start loading someone up a bit more and you're getting them to that 3-4 sets of 8 to 12 repetitions, and they're working pretty close to failure. How frequently do you typically get someone to train their glutes? I guess their lower body for in general, but if we're talking glutes here, like how long do you feel like is a good amount of time for adequate recovery?
Okay, so this is another great question, and the answer is it's kind of all over the place. If you look at the literature, there's not much support that training a muscle, some research shows that training a muscle 1 time a week is just as good as multiple times a week as long as you equate the volume. And then other studies show that 2 times a week is better than 1 time a week for other muscles, not on glutes. We don't have any research on glute training frequency with volume equated, but we do have research showing that basically if you do too much in 1 session, the glutes don't grow as well. So if you're going to failure, if you're going to true failure, you can't do as many sets. Now, so if you look at research, you're like, okay, twice a week would be sufficient. Now, if you look at, because I work with all the top bikini competitors, I've trained most of the the creme de la creme, the highest at the highest level, the top 10 in the world, and I know how they train, and they tend to train their glutes like at least 3 days a week minimum. Some do twice, most do 3 days, some do 4 or 5, and I even worked with one former bikini champion. She was Miss Bikini Olympia, and she trained glutes 6 days a week.
Wow.
But then you look at the type of training they do, and it's like the woman who trained 6 days a week did a lot of higher rep, like mind muscle connection, not heavy weight, really squeezing, not going for progressive overload. So it depends on the way you train. So I have this thing I call the rule of thirds, and it works out well. And I basically say, if you follow this, you can do 36 sets a week, spread out over 3-4 sessions, but you have to follow these rules. The first rule is a third of your exercise should be vertical, like squats and lunges, vertical loading, right? A third should be horizontal, like hip thrusts, back extensions, reverse hypers, pull throughs. And then a third should be lateral or rotary, like, abduction movements, hip external rotation movements. And then the second rule is a third of your sets should be heavy, a third should be medium, a third should be light, okay? And then the last rule is a third of your sets should be taken to failure or close to it, 1 rep shy of it. A third of your sets should be carried out, 2 to 4 reps shy of failure. And then another third should be carried out, not even close to failure, where you feel it, it's working, but these are typically with like abduction exercise. When you're done, you could probably do 10 more reps if someone had a gun to your head, but it's quick because it's uncomfortable and it's burning, When you follow these rules, you can do a lot more volume because horizontal and lateral and rotary exercises don't take as much out of you as vertical exercise. And then you're not hitting everything to failure and you're incorporating a lot of variety. So that's how I like to, plan out my weekly, like, and each workout would have like a horizontal exercise, 1 or 2 horizontal exercises, 1 or 2 vertical exercises, and then 1 or 2 lateral or rotary exercises. So you'd either do between 3 to 6 exercises a session and follow those rules. Then that tends to work well. But no matter what I tell you, it has to be individualized because, I can just tell you in the literature, you see these like crazy different responses to the same protocol. Some people gain 0 strength and muscle, and other people double their strength and increase their muscle by 50% from the same protocol. So your goal is to find the protocol that works best for you. And you might be the type that can't handle as much volume. I know, like I did a glute workout the other day and it was awesome. And I did 4 sets. That's it. I did 2 sets on the Nautilus glute drive, but I did 560 pounds for 20 reps. And then I did 650 pounds for 12 reps. Okay. Then I did 1 set of standing cable hip abductions, but I put on 150 pounds and did 15 reps on each side. And then I did this new exercise I just thought up recently, and it's a cable cuff, like a cuff or dip belt hip external rotation, where you attach it just below the knee, and you're doing like a rotation, like a hip external rotation exercise. And I had that on 150 pounds, and I did, I think, 10 or 12 reps per side. And I was shot after 4 sets. I'm moving a lot of weight. I'm a big guy, So that was sufficient for me. Most of my women would be like, oh my God, I feel like I didn't even do anything. But that's a combination of them having better endurance. They've trained their bodies to have a lot of stamina and not how to really push it really hard on a few sets. Mm-hmm. I think that's something they could do better with, is learning how to push it, learning how to train to true failure, and and utilizing progressive overload rather than relying on just volume for your progression and more and more sets to where you run down, and it's a lot of junk volume. You look at their routines, it's almost like you're doing cardio. You're not building muscle, you're doing cardio. Cardio doesn't build muscle.
Right.
So
yeah, no, that's interesting. And would you say that routine that you were just explaining, is that to maximize hypertrophy, or is that just kind of like a overall baseline standard that you apply for most of your clients and then you specialize it from there?
It's to maximize glute hypertrophy.
Mm-hmm.
And then build well-rounded strength. Power lifters would say, oh, we have the strongest glutes, but you have strong glutes in the squat and the deadlift. I like every lift. I love squats and deadlifts. I love hip thrusts. I love lunges. I love, leg press. I love back extensions. I love I like the seated hip abduction. I like cable standing hip abduction. I like every glute exercise there is. And so I don't just like one rep max strength. I like 1 rep max, 10 rep max, 20 rep max. So
yeah,
learn from the powerlifters, but then expand it. Say, I want to be strong. I want to learn what they know about maximal strength, but I want to be strong at all, 10 different lifts in a variety of rep ranges. And then that tends to be best for glute hypertrophy when you look at it that way.
Yeah. I saw you posted something recently with, I guess, the ongoing debate of, is a bigger muscle a stronger muscle? And I know that there's kind of two sides of that. I guess my question to you would be, where do you lie on that? Do you think a bigger muscle is always stronger? I know historically we've thought the larger the cross-sectional area of a muscle, the higher the tissue has to generate force. But I guess briefly, would you be able to give your insight on that?
Yeah, let me give you the breakdown on this. So basically, Jeremy Lenicky is a good researcher. He's I think Ole Miss University, and so he and his students over the last it's probably been 5 years or so have really put out. There are several studies. I put it on my Twitter a while back. If I can find this, but they rightfully pointed out that. So we always just assume there's probably like a linear relationship between. Yeah, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There are 8 articles that kind of apply to this. And the first was in December 2016. So it's been about, 3 years. So the first article appeared around 3 years ago. Yeah, April 24th, I posted this on Twitter. I posted the link to all 8 papers. Now, yeah, so the first one was December of 2016, and then a couple came out in June of 2017, and then a couple in 2018, and then a couple in 2019. So there's been this ongoing kind of debate amongst researchers, and you have Linicky's group saying, it's not as related as we thought. Here's a bunch of studies, and I recognize this as a researcher as well. I mean, I posted a blog years ago with a detraining study showing that with detraining they lost muscle mass but retained most of their strength. So I started noticing it too. And if you were an avid researcher, you would have noticed these things. And Lenicky was the first researcher to really draw attention to it. Okay. Then, but it was funny because when that started coming out, me and all my colleagues, we're like strength coaches and we're in the gym. We're like, it can't be. I mean, he's gone too far to the other side. He's like saying there's no relationship whatsoever, and he's using research to back it up. Okay, so then, to make a long story short, there were researchers like Andrew Vygotsky and Greg Nuckols. Those were probably the 2 main ones who really. I mean, there were like Facebook, like debates on Facebook and everything, but they published an article recently, and it was cool because both groups published an article in the same journal. I think it was anyway, I can't remember exactly which journal it was because my memory's failing me. But it was in Sports Medicine, and it was really really cool to read these 2 articles. These were posted in April of 2019, and it's a high-powered debate there, and basically I side with, I lean towards, I think Vygotsky and Chris Tabor, and I think Cody Hahn was on it, but they basically spell out where the flaws are in their thinking and how I wouldn't say they cherry picked a little bit, but anyway, the relationship tends to be more simple with, the simpler the movement. So with single joint actions and isometric actions, the relationship is between muscle mass and torque or strength is more related, whereas with more complex actions it's not as related. But here's a simple thing. It's like, if you've been lifting for a lot of years, like if I lost 20 pounds, I will lose a lot of strength. Why would, what can that be from? I'm not losing coordination. I'm not losing the skill. I'm performing the lift. Obviously, look, like powerlifting as weight classes, obviously bigger muscles help. And so, but by the way, the argument was never that a bigger muscle isn't just stronger muscle to begin, like your starting point. People who start off with more muscle are stronger than people who don't. It's the change in when you start lifting weight, the change in strength versus the change of muscle mass isn't highly related. And that's because there's so many factors that go into strength. You've got all your neural factors, you've got specific tension, you've got your hypertrophy factors, you've got architectural, you've got all these different psychological factors, all these, basically probably the biggest one is, intermuscular coordination. You've got like strength is a skill. And so you got to be practicing that skill, and you can gain a lot of strength without gaining a lot of muscle mass. Mm-hmm. Now, I respect Lineker and his group for, pointing this stuff out. I just think sometimes they go too far.
Yeah.
I also think that a lot of their knowledge is just, reading research. And if they trained more people and worked with people in person, they might have a different take. But it's been a really fascinating thing to watch, a fascinating debate.
No, that's cool. It's respectable even to try to look at the literature opposing it's contrary to popular belief. And it's interesting because Lineker comes out with a lot of research on VFR as well, right? And he shows, I'm pretty sure that it's Lineker, but there's a ton of research to show that improving cross-sectional area of a muscle using VFR has correlated to a significant or a very strong correlation with an increase in strength. So I thought that was interesting.
I haven't looked at strength. He's been on probably like, I don't know, 100, 200 articles on BFR. He's a very avid BFR researcher. Yeah. And he's shown that it builds muscle mass, muscle mass even with lighter loads. And that's what's cool about it, is you can build muscle mass using light loads. His group does come out with a lot of there's a lot of these type of researchers, like it started out, there was this Carpinelli, I think is Ralph or something. Carpinelli, he was like the first guy in sports science to really start picking holes in different theories and stuff. And a lot of these, he was a big hit guy, like hit meaning not hit like high intensity interval training, hit like one set to failure. You just need to do one set, you don't need multiple sets. And he thought that, every popular stance in strength and conditioning was wrong. And then you had a lot of these newer guys like James Steele and James Fisher, and I guess I would say Paulo Gentile, he's in Brazil, and then Jeremy Lineker. And it's funny because it's like their camp, and then there's like the Brad Schoenfelds and on the other side, and this group of researchers, and it's like, I wish we all could get along, and I wish we all respected each other more and could like talk on the phone about some of these issues, and like let's collaborate, let's design and figure and get to the bottom of this, because they still feel like the volume. I mean, there's still a lot of researchers that say one set is sufficient, and I wish it was. And I have actually happened to see great results from hitting one set to failure. I saw the best results of my life doing one set to failure. Mm-hmm. Back in the day when I was like 24, when I couldn't believe it. I think I was like, like overdoing it for a lot of years. And then I finally cut back, way back, and I saw a lot of growth. And I love, what's cool about hitting one set to failure. Say you pick like 8, say you do 8 sets in a workout, all different one, 8 sets of 8 different, one set of 8 different exercises. So your workout is 8 sets. You're pretty fresh on all 8 of those. Mm-hmm. Let's say I do a full body workout, and it consists of, a set of full squats, a set of, bench press, a set of stiff leg deadlifts, a set of weighted chin-ups, a set of hip thrusts, a set of military press, and a set of like, dumbbell chest supported rows. I don't know how many lifts that was,
That was
but
about 8, let's say.
even when you get to the end, when you're on the, the military press and the rows, you're not, all you may be drained overall, but you're not too bad, but your local, like your pressing musculature is still, strong. You've only done one set of bench. And so, and it's a different movement pattern. So you can have this awesome workout and it's really effective. So I love, I love the different styles of training. And I think some people see their best results doing that type of training. Just other people, I have other clients that it's crazy. Some of my I can think of 3 ladies with the best response to glute training, and they're like mutants. They can handle like 40 sets of hard sets a week of training their glutes. I would die from that type of training. That's why I said earlier, you got to tailor your training to the style that suits you best. And that requires experimentation. You got to learn these different styles, and you got to implement them and stick with them for a while. You don't just do them for a week, because when you first start training, say you've been doing 5 sets of every exercise and you say, okay, I'm going to try this HIIT training. You do 1 set. You're not good at it yet. You do the 1 set, you've trained your body to do 5 sets, so you do 1 set and you're like, I didn't even do anything, but you get better at it. I can do 1 set of something and just be wiped out from it. I can dig down deep and just keep, it's like, and I'm so psyched up and I'm, using so much mental energy, and I can push and push and then I'm spent. Most people need 5 sets to do that. So but it's like, I have my experience as a lifter, my experience as a trainer. I read the research, I read what these guys say. Then I can also look at the meta-analysis that Brad Schoenfeld and James Krieger have put out on just about they've done a meta-analysis on almost everything now. And, they show that, they've shown that, you get better results when you do more sets, but it's an inverted U, it's like there's a tipping point. And so, we were involved in a study that showed greater gains with like 48 sets a week, but that's an anomaly. You got to look at the whole body of literature. And then you can see, okay, some studies are showing this, some studies showing this, but they're all over the place. The volume studies are all over the place, where you have one study showing 5 sets is way better than doing 15 or 20 sets, and sometimes in some cases better than 10 sets. 5 sets a week, that's it, per muscle group. You have other studies, and then you have studies showing like German volume training, 5 sets of 10 got better results than 10 sets of 10. And then you have other studies showing, like ours, showing 48 sets was better. And so you got to look at all of them and look at and critically analyze them, and who was the population, what were they doing before, what was the routine like, how many days were they training. And you have to think like a lifter too, like, all right, is this, because there's flaws with every single study, or not flaws, but like limitations with every study. So, and then you try to apply that as a practitioner and go, okay, so I know that probably 10 to 20 sets a week is ideal for most people, but there's a wide variance. So I need to vary it according to the individual. Some people need to do more, some people less, but that's with everything. Some people like these exercises, some people don't, some people gravitate towards, even with hip thrusts. I've got 6 hip thrust stations at my gym. I've got 2 different the booty builder, the booty builder platinum, the glute builder, the hip thruster, the Nautilus glute drive, scorcher, what else? Oh, the Smith machine. So there are 7 different hip thrusting stations, and every one of my clients, my favorite is the glute drive, and I also love the Smith machine. And then I'd say that most people, their favorite is probably the hip thruster, which is funny because it's the cheapest. That's my invention. But that's just because it's really easy to standardize. But I would say the favorite machine is the booty builder. But some people love the glute builder and some people love this. And it's like a lot of people, my favorite is the Nautilus glute drive, but a lot of the women say they feel it too much in their quads. And I would say that most people like the booty builder selectorized weight stack, but some people like the new plate loaded model. It's all over the place. And it's the same way with every lift. You look at some people like doing wide grip bench press, some people close grip, some people don't like bench press, they like incline press, some people like doing dumbbells. Look at squats, some people like doing full squats, some people like doing parallel squats, some people sit back more, some people stay more upright, some people like a wider stance, it's just all over the place. So your goal as a lifter and as a trainer is to find help your clients or find the style that suits them best.
Yeah, and a lot of it comes down to intent and goal too, because you got to look at what's their end goal, and you can help them. But at the end of the day, you got to look at that person and their wants. And if they don't like a certain lift, I mean, you can't push it on everyone. Even if the research says, hey, this is the best one for you, if they don't like it, I mean, it's on them at that point. You guys got to collaborate, find what's most appropriate.
Absolutely. And also you have to think long term.
Yeah.
I can take any client and drive them into the ground for 8 weeks or 16 weeks and get them way stronger at their squats and their deadlifts and their bench press and chin ups, and then they get spoiled thinking, okay, that's their normal rate of strength gains, but that's not. They keep that up, or you keep training them, or they go off on their own and they think, okay, I'm going to keep pushing it this hard, and they eventually injure themselves. They always end up hurting themselves unless you teach them how to periodize and how to a more sensible way to go about it. I would say, like, yeah, I trained at a powerlifting gym for a couple years in Tempe. These guys were so strong, but they're also beat up, and the longevity, they have to really, a lot of them have to get, hip and knee replacement surgeries, and their muscles get too strong for their bodies. And these guys push it so hard. And if they used a more moderate approach, which is really hard to tell a powerlifter, chill out, calm down, don't go so hard. But yeah, the goal is to, you'll gain your most strength if you can train hard for, 2 decades and not just train hard for 2 years and then fall apart. So, yeah, and you have to learn those things the hard way. I mean, I'm still learning lessons. I still make stupid mistakes. I mentioned earlier, our Glute Lab, my gym has had no injuries, but all the trainers have hurt themselves. Like 3 times in the last year. So I make dumb mistakes always. It goes with the territory of being a good lifter. Like, if you're a good lifter, you and you're strong, you roll the dice sometimes, and this is how you learn over time. And what's cool too is when you do injure yourself, you always end up learning about your training while you're injured. You always pick up a couple of gems. You learn a couple new exercises you never would have done before. Mm-hmm. That's why you get so smart over the years.
Yeah. No, I mean, same thing with me. Whenever I have a specific injury, I can empathize. Not only that, I've felt what my patients have felt that are going through that exact same injury. But I think that you brought up a good point with what's sustainable for your client. And as I guess our brand is the Prehab guys, our goal is we see people after the fact that they're injured, but we're trying to educate on ways to mitigate risk of injury. A lot of that comes to rehabbing injuries as smoothly as safe as possible. So that way, when they get back to sport, they don't have that same injury. But what would you recommend, or if there's one piece of information that you wish everyone knew that could help with prehab or reducing the risk of injury? Because trainers are really at the forefront of injury prevention. You guys always see people before the fact, and obviously you want to make sure someone's as robust and as strong as possible, so that way when they're going through their daily activities or going through specific hikes or any hobbies that they have, they're at the lowest risk of injury. What's one big piece of one recommendation you would give people on how to prehab themselves?
So lifters tend to do the same. I look at all the bodybuilders at the gyms that I train at, the hardcore bodybuilders, and most of them, they're really, and I'm starting to get there. I'm 42. I have to warm up. It takes me longer to warm up. I'm in more pain. And we do the same lifts. We're always just you got, for the quads, you got your squats, your front squats, your hack squats, your lunges, leg extensions. For the hamstrings, you got your stiff leg deads, your different leg curl variations, maybe glute hammers or Nordics, but we're always moving in the sagittal plane, and we're always doing these barbell, dumbbell, and machine lifts, None of us, we weren't raised in this culture of nowadays this movement flow type training is really popular. Mm-hmm. I have to think that if I would have grown up like in PE, this picture like an example. I can't do a Cossack squat or Cassock squat, whatever you call it. I have to hold on to something. And imagine if you grew up doing that and you never stopped doing it. You could just go from one side to the next doing these Cossack squats. It's like a deep side lunge, but you turn the foot up as you do it, and kind of and imagine if we, we always were warming up with like types of push-ups, but we're like sliding, like doing to one side and then moving over the other side, kind of like a sliding push-up where you're going to your left side and then your right side, and doing all these different body weight movements. And really, I can't help but think if we were more versatile in our body weight, and also use bands, use kettlebells, use dumbbells, use barbells, use machines, use everything. They're all valuable tools. I'm a biomechanist aficionado, and I just love biomechanics, and I just look at everything like it's a tool to be used at the right time and place. And so if we did a little more different movements that got us out of our comfort zone, and some of these mobility drills and stuff, if we had those as part of our warm-up, and a lot of us have good range of motion, it's that we don't have strength in these deep ranges. It's like, like I said, I can't do the Cossack squat. I should be able to. I've been lifting for 27 years. But anyway, I wish that were more ingrained in our curriculum and culture.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. Explore your body, try new things. I mean, there's so much that's out there. I think the hard part for people is trying to figure out or weeding out the stuff that they should try. There's just information overload in today's day. But yeah, I like that. Just try new things, explore your body, and see what you can and can't do. Explore these ranges of motions that your body may not feel comfortable with, and your body adapts. That's what all this is. Training is getting your body to adapt. So thanks so much, Bret. I really appreciate all that information. I learned a ton. I'm sure our followers learned a ton as well. Where can people follow you on social media? I know you kind of talked about it earlier. I know you have your website, your blog, social media.
Well, I don't blog much anymore. I want to start up again, but I haven't been doing Facebook, Twitter. I've just been all over Instagram. So nice. My Instagram is Bret Contreras 1, but you could just type in the Glute Guy and I come up. So if you don't know Bret Contreras, just type in Glute Guy. But Instagram, I'm very consistent with.
Yeah, your followers have been going through the roof with Instagram recently.
Yeah, I just gave a talk for the NSCA National Conference, 1,000 followers a day and counting. That was the name of the presentation.
Oh, really?
It's interesting because I always speak on glutes or biomechanics or strength. This one was actually on social media strategies, so it was kind of fun.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, momentum is everything with that. And if you have a little bit of surge or a little bit of engagement and you ride that out, I mean, you can get exponential growth of your page. Anyone's page really, but I mean, you've done a great job of growing your account. And have you been on Instagram for that long?
I have. I don't know. God, I can't remember if it's been like 5 years or what, but my brother actually made me get on, and I'm like, you can't monetize Instagram.
Yeah.
How long? Yeah, I'm like, I don't want to join it. I'm like, Joel, my twin brother's name is Joel. I'm like, Joel, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm not just here to screw around and look at pictures. I'm a working man. So if I can't monetize it, and he's like, trust me, you'll be able to monetize. I'm like, how? He's like, yeah. Just trust me and get on. He made me start an account, and I'm so glad I listened to him.
Smart brother. Does he train his glutes? That's the real question.
Yeah, he does goblet squats. He does back extensions. He does hip thrusts here and there, but he's not consistent with them. He likes frog pumps too, just like me. So he trains them, but not with progressive overload. So I have 5 more inches in circumference around my hips than he does. A good case study,
That's funny. I didn't know you had a twin brother.
Yeah, identical.
That's funny. He's not in San Diego though, right?
He's in Phoenix. I told him I'll help him, move here. I owe him because I'm doing so well, and it's because of him. So I'm going to try and help him out here.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, San Diego is awesome. Like we were talking about before, I used to live there. Great place. And you're right on the beach, right?
Yeah.
That's awesome. Cool. All right, Bret. Well, thanks again for everything. We'll stay in touch.
Yes. Thank you for having me. Great questions.
After listening to this podcast, Bret actually inspired me to create an article on the hip thrust, showing you guys a ton of different hip thrust variations. Check out the website for more. If you listened to this entire podcast, I'm hoping that you enjoyed it. Please rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast. This helps us tremendously. Thanks for listening.